Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear members, and annyeonghaseyo, dear colleagues in Seoul, South Korea. Although our heads and our hearts are very much in Ukraine these days, today we still decided to still organize this event today, and this has really elicited a very good response from our members. And this event is about doing business with Korean companies in Hungary. And we also have some guests from the AHKs from the neighboring countries. This is why we decided to have English interpretation as well. And you can select your language at the bottom of the page and listen to the English interpretation. So some of you may wonder why we as DUIHK are taking up this issue. There are two reasons. Well, before I started working in Hungary, I headed the wonderful German-Korean Chamber of Commerce for 8 years. And we have been in a strong network globally and linked in partnership together with the German Chambers of Commerce abroad. Many members approached me about Korea after I started in Hungary and indicated their interest in it. And for me, on the other hand, it was also a seal of quality for Hungary that so many Koreans are involved in business here. And on the other hand, Korean investors took the top position in Hungary in terms of FDI in 2021. And Germany, of course, remains the undisputed #1 investor in terms of stock of investments. And in 2021, Korean companies invested even more than before, making investment decisions worth almost 2.8 billion euros, creating 3,500 jobs in the near future. And in the EU, Hungary had the second highest Korean investment between 2018 and 2020. And among the countries, Hungary has the most Korean investors, followed by Poland and the Czech Republic. So that is reason enough for German companies in Hungary and CEE to look at Korean companies in the country as potential business partners. So to all of you who are expecting a magic bullet from this event today, to you, I have to say that it is more complicated than that. If you work with Korean companies, you need patience in building up the relationships, and if the companies are in your countries, same goes for that situation as well. And you need a great deal of flexibility in ongoing cooperation. But those who master this endurance sport and the skills and adapt to the Korean approach can do good business worldwide, just like the more than 500 German companies in Korea. Because the access to Korean companies doesn't only mean access to one market, but really also to a worldwide presence of these companies. Now, I would like to introduce you briefly our two experts. Hoje Woo, Mr. Hoje Woo is one of them who has been working for AHK Korea since 1999, and he has been working on the daily basis with German companies and also German associations or federal states to introduce German companies to Korean customers and orders. And the other guest today is Mr. Frank Robaschik, who has lived in Korea for many years and as versus a correspondent for German Trade and Invest and a valued partner of the AHK Korea. So, and now it's actually his second time in Korea, and he speaks Korean. He has a lot of expertise, and he observes the Korean market. He analyzes the market and analyzes the economic activity within Korea and outside, of course, as well. So before we start with the two presentations, I would like to show you a film that HIPA, the Hungarian investment promotion agency, has kindly made available to us, and it shows impressively that the economic relations of Hungary and South Korea are nothing new, and it developed after Korean War very quickly. And the footprint of Korean companies in Hungary is already very substantial. And we have around 261 Korean companies in the country, and they employ about 20,000 employees. And primarily these companies are active in the battery, automotive, and electronics industries. Last November, South Korean President Moon Jae-in visited Hungary with a business delegation to further deepen the cooperation with Hungary, and not only with Hungary, but also with the V4 countries via Hungary. So this much about a first impression, and we will show you the film, which is a little long, but I think it is very interesting indeed. And you can see and learn more about the activities of Korean companies in Hungary.
1988, Trade Office in Seoul. A Hungarian trade office opens in Seoul. 1988, establishment of Kotra Budapest. The Budapest branch of the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency was established to promote trade and investment between Korea and Hungary. 1989, full diplomatic relations. Hungary was the first country in the Central and Eastern European region to assume full diplomatic relations with the Republic of Korea. 1989, establishment of KTB Bank subsidiary in Budapest. 1989, first Korean investment. As the first investment in Hungary by a Korean company, Samsung establishes its factory in Jászfényszó. 1990, Korean School. The Korean School opens in Budapest. 2012, Korean Cultural Center, Budapest. The Korean Cultural Center, now the largest in Europe, opens in Budapest. 2019, direct flights. Since 2019, direct flights are available between Budapest and Seoul. 2019, top investor in Hungary. In 2019, Korean businesses became the top investors in Hungary in terms of investment volume and job creation. 2020, more than 200 businesses. By 2020, more than 200 Korean businesses are in operation in Hungary, employing almost 20,000 people. Pioneering Korean investors. The brightest new light in the star-studded sky of the Hungarian economy is electromobility. Samsung SDI and SK On, as the battery division of SK Innovation. Both have been operating their first European facilities in Hungary, producing batteries for partially or fully electric cars. Samsung SDI. The Samsung Group, with more than 7 decades of history, is implementing one of the largest Asian investments in Hungary. Samsung SDI, the battery manufacturing business line of the Korean company, is expanding its manufacturing facilities in Good, where batteries have been produced since 2018. SK On. The company's battery division has established its first European factory unit in Komárom, and is carrying out the greatest domestic greenfield foreign direct investment project of all time in Iváncsa. Rapidly developing Korean business community. These corporations represent merely the crest of the wave for the cooperation of these two countries. Korean companies are one of the largest investors in Hungary, and trade between Korea and Hungary is steadily increasing. Currently, there are more than 200 Korean companies operating in Hungary, primarily in battery, automotive, and electronics industries.
Nach diesen Eindrücken möchte ich
After
übergeben.
this impression, I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Frank Robaschik, the director and correspondent of GTAI in Korea, and we will collect the questions during the presentations. You can ask them in the chat, and you can, of course, later on raise your hand with the raise hand button, and after we can discuss your questions in an interactive manner. So, Mr. Robaschik, I would like to pass you the floor. Thank you very much. It was a very nice movie, and it's great to have had and received this from HIPAA. I think it has been a very successful economy in Korea in the past years. And just about our organization, we are a partner of the HIPA, and we deal with the questions of economy and climate protection, and we promote German companies in foreign markets, and we provide information, and we also have a data bank and internet. You probably know Valdemar Richter in Budapest, who has a very similar role to what we play here in South Korea. So, and then how we find investors. We try to find competent investors and provide free advice for foreign companies. And our focus is to create jobs in Germany as well, and to really provide support in entering on the market. So South Korea, after the Korean War, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, but it has gone through a very strong and fast growth, and now it's become one of the most important economies in the world. So it's about the fourth in its growth all over the world. And I think they also managed the corona pandemic very well, much better than others. So now they're the 10th biggest economy in the world, and they have even passed Brazil in this aspect. And the economy is larger than Spain, and it is about 10 times the size of Hungary. So if you compare it by capita, it is similar to Italy, and I think they have a very high purchasing power. So and South Korea is also one of the largest exporting countries. So they are worldwide on the 7th rank in this aspect. If we take the capital, we have about 10 million inhabitants, and it's about 605 square kilometers as a surface of the capital, and it's larger than Hungary. So you can imagine how it's much more densely populated than Hungary, actually. And if you look at these framework conditions, South Korea is becoming a very interesting test market. South Korea managed the coronavirus pandemic very well. And in the first year of the pandemic, there was only a minus of 0.9% of the GDP, and they even had a plus afterwards of 4%. So South Korea has really exceeded its pre-pandemic performance. And what is also very special, investment in equipment has also a change during this time. And if we look at the development of research and development, it's very important. Energy, biotech, and electronics are the most important fields in this regard. And South Korea, it is close to China, of course, and we can see that China is very quickly growing, and Japan is, of course, also very close, and they're also very advanced in their economy and industry. And they invest in different kinds of equipment, and they have many large companies, but there are more dependent smaller companies as well. Since 2011, there has been a free trade agreement with the EU. So Germany and Hungary can import to or export to South Korea duty-free since that time. And in Korea, as Ms. Zollmann has also experienced this. There are still limitations to importing certain goods. For example, there is no possibility to import meat from Germany. And if we look at the German exports outside of Europe, then you can see that there has been also advantages of this good management of the COVID pandemic. And in 2021 is South Korea is really the second largest buyer of German goods in the Asia Pacific region. And if we look at the structure of the German exports to South Korea, then we can see that motor and vehicles and parts are in the forefront, and they have been profiting for a very long time of this free trade agreement. And semiconductors and pharmaceuticals have seen a growth mainly in 2021, especially vaccines. So investment projects, Korean investors usually look at the tendencies and developments abroad and reflect on how they could benefit from these developments, how they could improve there. And many areas are still electronics, chips and semiconductors, and in this sector they are really leading worldwide. And but also in ships and in the construction of ships and vessels and smartphones, they are leading the way. And the mobile connection of devices and 5G, this is also an area where they are very strong. And electronic devices, household devices, appliances, and of course power plants, and also the construction of facilities in this regard. And many production sites have been relocated to companies abroad. It's not only for the smartphone domain, but also for car production. And South Korea is also in competition with China, because like we said, the economy is growing very quickly in China. LG Electronics And last month, or even actually a week ago, um, they said that they saw that there is a very strong competition, especially in the battery production, electric battery production, and also in the vessel production with China. And now we can see these areas where there will be more investments. Semiconductor business, it's an investment of over $400 billion. So of course, it is something that can be influenced from a political point of view, but I think even with a new government, they will still keep that focus. And then renewable energy, it is also something that is considered a priority, and the expansion of the railway network and the GTX lines are extended, and this is something really highly interesting. It is very high speed, just like TGV, but it is underground, and they are passing very long distances. And then a hydrogen economy, they are trying to develop technologies in this area that they can sell all over the world. Biotechnology, it's been very strong in the past years, and in the next years, new plants will be established, and some biologics and Celltrion are the two largest companies, but there are of course other actors. And the other area, batteries for electric cars, and this is also an area of high investment in US, but also in Europe. And then the role of displays, drones, air taxes, and so on. So these are all interesting areas to them. And it can be a very interesting partner for cooperation for companies abroad. And I have just displayed two things with data here about the size. Actually, so the direct investments abroad, about $60 billion US in 2021. So and then foreign construction assignments or contracts of an amount of about 30.6 billion US are added to that. So, and of course more are expected for the coming month or year. And there are also other connected markets, such as Hungary, for example. It can be a very important country for Korean investment. If you do business with South Korea, you should always look at the partners, and you should take advantage of the services provided by AHK. And Hungary, there is SK On, for example, but this is just one of the companies of the SK group. In 2019, they had a turnover of about 140 billion US dollars. And then we also have one of the subsidiaries of the VW group, and we also have Hyundai, as you can see. So the partners are able to take advantage of working with these companies. But you can, of course, also work together with the smaller actors and maybe establish a more personal relationship or connection with them. So just some risks. The household debt is it's relatively high in comparison, and if the interests are increasing, that will be really important. And this is not an imminent risk, but it can become dangerous. And of course, we also need to look at demography, and the demography is currently shrinking. The population is shrinking, so this is something that they are not very much satisfied with. And the infrastructure, however, is really excellent, and the workforce is really very well trained, very well qualified, and well engaged. And I just would like to raise your awareness of certain publications regarding certain areas. So if you're interested in some of these areas, you can, of course, find some information under these links. And of course, you can always contact us and we can provide more information. Now I'm looking forward to the next presentation by Mr. Hoje Woo. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Robaschik. It is always very impressive to hear about this. And I think we will have more opportunities to talk about this later. So I think we will have some questions on that. If you have any questions, of course, you are invited to ask these questions in the chat. But now I would like to welcome my former colleague, Mr. Hoje Woo, to speak about entering in the market with the Korean companies. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
So, noch einmal guten Morgen.
Good morning. My name is Hoje Woo, and I'm a vice managing director of AHK Korea, and I'm very happy to be able to talk to you about the Korean business culture and about my thoughts about establishing contact with Korean companies and what I consider important in this aspect. So today, in my presentation, I would like to discuss the following items, the characteristics of Korean culture and the customer requirements, and the mode of operation of a corporate site, and AHK Korea in general, introduction of this institution. So first of all, I think it is very helpful for establishing Korean business relationships. If you know something about the Korean culture, in the meantime, many business people in Korea have experience with international partners, but I think they still have some characteristics that we need to highlight for the Korean culture and that are more characteristic for South Korean partners. So I would like to highlight some key words for the cultural standards, hierarchy, and orientation towards a personal relationship, indirectness, spontaneity, loyalty, and emotionality. And as follows, I would like to discuss these items more in detail. So hierarchy orientation based on the history and also the influence of Confucian philosophy. The Korean society is very hierarchically structured. So the Confucian philosophy had a very strong influence, and it is still very present in Korea these days. Status criteria is, for example, the marital status. If you're single, married, it played an important role earlier. Now it's less important, and something that is still very important and matters is the age and the title you have and the importance of the company and the other aspects that are listed. So the age is very important because you always need to respect those that are older. And if you have, for example, some conflict on the street or somewhere outside of your house, then you sometimes ask for the age of your counterpart to know if they're older or not. And titles are very well respected. If there is, again, some conflict or argument, this also matters a lot. And of course, they respect their supervisors. And they are very modest. usually those people that are too proud and of their own performance, they are usually not preferred in Korea. So the focus is more on a good relationship with business partners, and they usually prefer this instead of having a good written contract. And the harmony in the respective social group is valued more highly than formal rules and written agreements. So before entering into a business relationship, it is well advised to get to know each other before, and a lot of effort and energy is invested into the maintenance of personal relationship when doing business. So, for example, there is a business contact, and it only serves economic purposes, and it is very important also to have a good personal relationship with the partners, because this is what can really lead you to a fruitful cooperation. Indirectness in Korea, for any kind of communication, it is very important the way you say things, the way you express yourselves. Of course, it can depend on the person, but in general, in Korea, when it comes to communication, even to critiques, it is important to save face. It is a big priority, and they're usually very careful in describing things. And so if you get the feedback that seems very favorable, but not decided, it can actually happen that the Korean partner has tried to indirectly express their opinion to you, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would return to you for placing an order. So usually if they have a negative impression, or they find something that they don't like about an offer, they don't usually state it directly and clearly. So they are very spontaneous and flexible. What do you think we could use for describing the mentality of Korean people very well? I think speed would be a good word. They are impatient and they have a hard time to wait for things. They are always in a rush, and they have a hard time waiting until a paper is, for example, printed from the printer. So this is a good example for showing how the impatient they can be. So they need to learn that they shouldn't try to pull out the paper before it is properly printed from the printer. And Bali Bali is an important word to learn. It means quickly. And I think Bali Bali Dali Dali is very similar. So this is what we also hear a lot in Germany. And this means things need to be done very quickly or immediately, and people want to have these things immediately when they say that. So they're very spontaneous and less regulated or less attached to rules. And what really counts is the mutual trust between the partners, and they don't always check contracts very carefully. So let's take a look at loyalty. It's not like it used to be, but it is still a virtue in the Korean society. And usually Korean partners are loyal and they don't want to break the trust to their partners. They're loyal to people, to groups, and to companies. And this is something you need to take into consideration if you want to establish business in Korea, or if you have ongoing big business in Korea. And emotionality. People say that Koreans are actually like Italians, but in Asia. And the difference might be that they have a longer self-control, but when it happens that the trust is broken, then things can really explode. And I saw examples of serious conflicts in this regard. And some partners actually just had the plan of a little bit having an argument with the Korean partners, but it had very severe consequences because they got really upset about it. So the customer requirements, they expect a very quick response from their business partners. And I have already told you about this. And it is clear that Korean people expect a very quick response, quick reaction when it comes to emails, for example. It is usually best if you can respond to their mails immediately, and even 30 minutes later they might be impatient, and this is the way they are. So, and customers or Korean people sometimes more quickly than business partners in other markets. So this is why Korean markets are usually used as a test market by many international actors. And customers in Korea often expect free after-sales services. So this is something that you should already calculate into the price beforehand. And now we'll arrive to the next item, and this might be interesting for you as well. So I would like to speak about the working way of working of the Korean companies in Budapest, for example. It is also very interesting to see how Korean companies work in their projects. And I had contact with a Korean company in this regard. They have a site, a subsidiary in Budapest, and these are responsible for the purchasing of their project. Of course, the information that I have gathered from this communication is not applicable everywhere, but I think it provides a very good point of orientation for you. So this Korean company works for a project of with contact information of selected companies in Hungary. And now how does this company acquire this contact information? The first instrument would be a Google research, and the company looks up certain technologies in the Google search bar, and then finds a list of the related companies. And after, it is very important that your companies are also present in the internet and can be found with the help of good keywords or search words, so that they are displayed when they make a search. And according to this company, there are companies that are entering in contact with the Korean partner by themselves, and in that case, they check the information the partner sends, and of course they look at the homepage of their partners, and then they are checked for the quality of the company, what kind of technology, what kind of products they specialize in, what is the history of the company. And this is why you should really maintain your website, not only from an optical point of view, but also from the content point of view. You should always update it. And if you want to have a contact with a Korean company or establish a contact to a Korean company, you shouldn't forget to use your relationships. Just try to see if you or your colleagues or your partner companies already have a contact to this company you're planning to work with. So you should maybe try to use these contacts to be able to establish the contact with the Korean companies, because if you do so, I think it is much stronger than if you just contact the company out of the blue. And I think we can discuss this later on after my presentation more in detail. Now, I would like to speak about the foreign Chamber of Commerce, AHK, and it has been founded in 1981, and it's the second largest bilateral chamber of commerce in Korea with over 500 members and 22 German-speaking employees. And of course, we have a comprehensive and a target group-oriented contact research, and we also establish business partnership, and we help entering the market and establishing contact with Korean partners. So if you look at the market entry or breakthrough in the market, this is something where we can help, and we try to make it as easy as possible, and we help with support in communication or already in the establishment of contact with Korean companies, because we have our expertise that can really provide support. And then now I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mr. Woo. So this is as much as we can pack into one presentation. I think we need to discuss the open questions among ourselves. And I have a first question to Mr. Woo. If there is a company in Hungary and we say that, okay, Hankook Tires in Rácamash, how can I get in touch with them, establish a contact with them? What would you advise to this company that is actually inquiring? I would first look in around me. It doesn't necessarily have to have in my companies, but I would look at partner companies and other companies that I know, if they have that contact already established to that company. I think if we have the opportunity to be introduced by someone else, then it is more effective than just showing up and starting a new relationship from scratch. If you have an acquaintance and that says that there is a friend that would like to find out about this and that, then I really put some effort into it, because I have already a certain relationship to that person, and I don't want to I don't want to really hurt that person, or I don't want to break that relationship. So and then of course afterwards it will be possible to you to introduce yourself, and in that case you need to be very well prepared. I think if you go there personally, then you have to have your presentation or documentation very well established and well prepared. And Kotra can also provide very good support, and and of course, it is also possible to contact the HQ in Korea and try to establish the contact via them, or to find out who would be the right person to talk to in your country. Thank you very much. These are also topics that I also remember. We had a project with VDMA regarding chain of cooperation with German technologies and German service providers, where many different companies from the same industry sector work together, and they wanted to have a contact to a large conglomerate and position themselves as suppliers. And that was a very complex process to deal with, and yeah, to address Korean companies directly is very complicated. And I just wanted to ask you, what are the decision competencies of a Korean representative in Hungary as compared to their headquarters? Is it really, does it make sense to contact the people here, the representatives here in Hungary, or should is that possible? If you have to take that step on your own, can you address the Korean representatives here? I think we cannot generalize here. It really depends on the companies, and it can be very different also when it comes to the representatives themselves as a person. So the subsidiaries usually report on a regular basis to their headquarters. So the highest power is in the hands of the mother companies, and the big decisions are, of course, always taken in Korea. But when it comes to a project, usually it requires an authorization from the headquarter. But if the subsidiary already has that also authorization, then it might be possible that they are also take a decision on their own in this regard. So thank you very much. And earlier you also mentioned the different levels you need to take into account: status and age, and the way they changed and their importance in the past years. But we also experienced in the practice that there were managing directors from companies, and they requested an appointment with the president of Samsung, and we were a little bit smiling about it, because there are so many hierarchical structures between the companies, and it is not always the way people would imagine. And of course, in that case, we can always step in and help you to find the right contact person to establish the contact with. There are two aspects. So first of all, status criteria. I mentioned the importance of the company, how large the company is or how small it is. This is, of course, also something that is an important criterion for status. And then titles, of course, there's the German entrepreneur who is a general manager, and he's from Germany. That is a title, but there are assistant managers, deputy general manager, and general managers in Korea. And when you're up at that level, there's a deputy director, vice president, president, vice chairman, and chairman. So there are so many various structures and levels of hierarchy. So in that aspect, we would really recommend to German companies to have important titles on their cards. President is, for example, more impressive than a general manager, because that means more in Korea, or at least directors. So if you have a title like that on your card, and then you will probably have the right person discussing with you on the other side as well. So I think it is well advised to find out what is the right title to address and to use, and maybe then you can find someone who has a higher level in the hierarchy in Korean. So we have a first question. Is there a Korean business community in Hungary? Maybe I'm able to respond to this on my own. Yeah, there is such a community in Hungary, and it is very difficult, however, to enter as a foreigner. It is a very close community. Where you can actually only enter if you have someone who is bringing you into that. So sometimes we organize such networking events, but it is very rarely possible to actually establish good relations of trust if you haven't known these people before, if you have no connection to them whatsoever. So it is maybe very similar to what you have also said, Mr. Wu, that Korean people are very indirect, and they usually take some time before entering into business relationships with their partners. And there is also language barriers, and many of the although Korean people speak German and English is also spread, but there might be some difficulties in the communication, and Koreans themselves help other Koreans and their partners to communicate. Of course, that can really facilitate communication. And we as AHK, we have a very strong experiences in that as well. And we had also cases where we had discussions and meetings in various languages, and then afterwards the participants just wanted to stay a little bit more to discuss things finally in their own mother tongue. And Mr. Robaschik, if you could maybe tell us how Korean companies are discovering new topics and new fields of activity. What do you see? What are the hottest topics? What are the areas in transformation or in development? I think this is also something very important for our background. I think there's a clear response to that. There are various levels. I think the most exciting is the companies themselves that are in development. And I think I also mentioned the list of these company groups. And it means that these groups of companies are usually by fact listed as family enterprises. So they have been founded as family companies, family enterprises, and they have grown into large companies. And they have been inherited by the successors. And there has to be a leadership. If Hyundai says, for example, they want to enter into air taxis and drones and e-mobility, then this is something, if it is expressed as a communication from the leadership, it has a very strong impact on the companies in this area, and they would like to also take this direction. And then the strong industry policy that is to be observed in Korea. So the government, as we have elections next week, so it is also very important for potential partners to know the government and their focus points in their economy, and they are also well established and specified. In the beginning it is sometimes vague, but after certain times the contour is getting clearer and clearer which direction the government would like to go to. So the government establishes financing mechanisms, incentives, taxation incentives, various schemes to support these goals. And of course, all of the companies from all of these supported sectors would like to jump on the opportunity straight ahead. So sometimes energy played a role, sometimes it didn't that much, but and it doesn't always work for the companies to always join into these developments, but this really also defines the direction of development by the companies. I think there are also very strong development stories, and this is why Korea can be actually very successful in certain areas. Yeah, so this is why the progress can be very strong in certain areas of the market, because the government also supports these areas, and this is where the companies would also like to concentrate their forces in. So you also mentioned the presidential elections and the way this can change the programs. So what is actually the forecast regarding the priorities of these candidates we currently have for Germany, for example? So the most important is the real estate market. This is something that really moves the population, because they are asking themselves the questions if they would be able to get a flat or a house in the future. I am not sure of all the points, but there are differences in the field of renewable energies. One of the candidates is very much in favor of renewables, and their party is a little bit shy regarding the nuclear energy. And the other candidate, which is actually more ahead in the polls, they are more favor of nuclear energy, and they would like to have more focus on that area, and even establish more nuclear power plants. So this is a difference between the candidates, but I think the differences are not so important between the two candidates. Both of them want to establish more free trade agreements, so I think the bottom line is really similar, and there is one big difference. The Jung, the Democratic of the government party, has a much stronger focus on state intervention than the other candidates when it comes to higher taxation, or also incentives or subventions, so or subsidies. So they are more in favor of regulation, but the Democratic Party has more of a European imagination of economic policy, and the other party likes or prefers the US way. So it's hard to decide which would be better. Okay, so let's wait and see the results of that election, and then of course we will be able to discover the direction. And then another question to Mr. Woo. If companies would like to discover the market, to have a better orientation of the Korean market, and to prepare first discussions, and to maybe look at potential partner companies. Is that possible to enter the country, or what is the regulation or restriction is like from a COVID point of view? Well, the Omicron cases currently are very high, so travel is not very easy. Social distancing is still a rule, and we still have some restrictions for traveling into the country. So you have to go into quarantine first, and to be able to leave the quarantine, it's not easy. So this is why um, sometimes we are forced to find virtual methods. But of course, if it is something such as the maintenance of machines where you cannot avoid a personal presence, then it is maybe easier to leave the quarantine. But after COVID, it will be easier, but there are still some restrictions in force. And we also had an event with Myung, the presidential candidate, and there are face-to-face. So we have some face-to-face events, but traveling into the country is still very difficult. AHK also provides support in finding exceptions, ways of exceptions, or approval for such an exception when it comes to quarantine. So if there is something that is prepared, it might be worthwhile to get some information in that regard and to contact us for that. So, but this is maybe something for the future. So thank you very much, Mr. Woo and Mr. Robaschik, for your presentations and for taking us for a trip to Korea. And I hope that we will have more and more partners and partnerships established. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us, also AHK Hungary. And I would like to wish you a very nice day, and I hope to see you again at some of our other events.